Question. How do you replace a former Archbishop of Canterbury? Answer. You see, you're all listening. Okay, so just a quick introduction. My name is MaryAnne. I'm a faithful companion of Jesus, an FCJ sister. I'm from Malta originally, and at the moment I've just been, for the last few months, at the FCJ Centre for Spirituality and Eco-Justice in just very near London Euston. My career was in teaching, hence I don't mind playing the fool on a stage. So I taught for many years in one of our schools, and I'm now really delighted to be working in eco-justice and connecting to so many of you, both who come and use our centre, but also who work for justice. So this morning, actually this afternoon, I got the email to realise that Rowan Williams was not going to come. And I thought nothing about it. I sat on the train, happily coming here. And quite recently I was asked, would I help this session to come through. So this is what I'm going to do. I am not here to speak to you with any expertise. I'm here to have a conversation with Katrina. And I am in a sense the primary learner in this conversation because I know very little about Gospel Nonviolence. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Katrina has to say and maybe ask some pertinent questions as we go to enable you to also get the best out of her experience and her expertise. So enough of me. Katrina, tell us something first of all about yourself, about your family life and how you come to be here.
Okay, well, I think you can firstly see why we asked MaryAnne to do this. So if you've read your booklet cover to cover, which I know you all have, you will know that I come originally from Northern Ireland, and I grew up during the Troubles, so I guess deep within me was always a yearning for peace, true peace. My family were Baptists, and my second home was the church. And I know some of the young people here at conference will know what I'm talking about, you know, not just Sunday events, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday events too. But it was a culture of violence, fear, intimidation. It was also steeped in, I guess, well, it reflected the culture that was around us. So our theology and our spirituality was either fight or flight. So you either joined in the violence, so depending on what side of the fence you were on, you might have joined the British Army, or you might have joined the armed wing of the IRA, or other paramilitaries. Or if you took the more flight mode, which I guess my family did, you stepped away from that and almost pretended it wasn't happening. But of course the trauma of that still permeates all of your existence. So a little example, my grandparents lived in Derbyshire, just down the road from here, and we came on holiday, and I'd have been about 8-9 years old, and my granny took me into C&A in Derby, and I was all excited. I was going to get some new clothes. I need to put the mic down at this point because I walked through the door and did this. I think there's probably only one person in the room who knows exactly what that is. I expected to be frisked, because even children in Northern Ireland were frisked, because we could have been carrying bombs or guns. And my granny burst into tears that her granddaughter had become so normalised to violence and war. And it took a long time for me to discover the beauty of this third way of gospel nonviolence that came many decades later.
Sister Katrina. So,
Yes.
So we call you Sister Katrina. So tell us something how you come from being a child in Northern Ireland to being a sister of St. Joseph of Peace.
The edited version. I often joke that going to university and studying theology saved my faith, because it was the first opportunity I had to take scripture and theology seriously, but not literally. And that's really important. And it was during my time at university, I had already had the blessing of meeting Bruce Kent. He came to speak at my sixth form because my family did eventually move to Derbyshire when the Troubles were at their worst. And I had to tell my parents a little white lie that I was going to hear a Catholic priest talk about nuclear disarmament. I said something about, it's part of the politics curriculum or something. But at university, I guess the study helped. But also during that time, things were happening that enabled me to experience Catholic communities. So I encountered the L'Arche community. I started to read people like Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day. And I guess the seeds to another way were sown. It still took a long time for me to become a Catholic, because for my family it was just abhorrent. It caused so much tension and friction, and fear, I think, a real fear of the unknown. But I sort of knew that when I stepped into the Catholic world, that call was also to religious life. And given my background, you won't be surprised that I discerned joining the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, whose charism is to bring peace through justice. And also, they're quite a diverse, radical bunch, so I sort of felt I fitted in quite well.
And how did you encounter Pax Christi? Was that before, after? And what is your role in Pax Christi now?
Yeah, so I have the privilege at the moment of being National Chaplain to Pax Christi. And I think my job description says something like offering theological and spiritual reflection on our work. It tends to be more like doing anything and everything that needs to be done, which is how we in Pax Christi work. But it is a real privilege to journey with them. And I first encountered them when I moved back to London, maybe 15, 16 years ago. And I really treasure Pax Christi's liturgical year, that no matter where you live in the UK, that liturgical year you can tap into and become part of. So it's good, and it's good to be part of a more international movement too, working for peace and non-violence.
So let's just delve a little bit into gospel non-violence. First of all, just give us some basics of how you would describe that to somebody who've never heard of it. And is it a universal understanding of it? Does everybody who says gospel non-violence mean the same thing?
That's a really good question. The answer is probably no, just as we in the Catholic tradition, if we said the Eucharist and asked each person in this room what does that mean, you'd hear something slightly different. I would describe gospel non-violence as this third way, that Jesus embodies another way of responding to violence and oppression, because Jesus wasn't sitting in an ivory tower somewhere. He was living in a country of occupation. Now, we look at the Holy Land and see today what that looks like for some people. And there is God born on the margins, and embodying another way of responding to injustice and oppression. And I think the Gospels really give us a clue to what that means. So I would say that Luke's Gospel and the Acts of the Apostle, which we believe was written by the same community of faith, give us clues to how we deal with economic injustice. So that would translate today into thinking about things like a just taxation system, redistribution of wealth, all those types of things. And then the writers of Matthew and Mark, where we get the Beatitudes, so blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who are persecuted. They are recounting how Jesus shows them the way to resist oppression without resorting to violence. So we have all those amazing stories about turning the other cheek, walking the extra mile, which have become diluted, I think, to mean, well, just humbly bow your head and suffer for suffering's sake. But I would see that as Jesus' way of saying to us, no, the opposite. Put them on the back foot. If you want a really good account of this, read Walter Wink. Read Walter Wink, Jesus' Third Way. Because these are tools we can use to resist. And hence, from this, gospel nonviolence becomes a peace movement of resistance. And then I would say that John's Gospel tells us the reason why we're doing this. Love, love, love. And so those three elements together, I would argue, reveals how we live our discipleship, following a Jesus who was embodying God's nonviolent love.
So you've given us some examples in the Gospel of that. Could you just give us a few more and maybe say something about what does non-violence actually mean? Obviously not shooting somebody, but like in a subtle way.
I think in its subtle forms, Jesus encounters with everybody from those on the margins to Roman soldiers. Jesus looks for the dignity in each person, and that's the essence of non-violence. That when we look someone in the eye, we, no matter how they're acting or acting out, whether we perceive them as friend or foe, whether they're labelled in society as the other or different, that they are made in the likeness and image of God. So I think that's throughout Scripture. I would then say at the heart of our faith, obviously, is the Passion story, which I think is the ultimate act of non-violence. The last words of Jesus to his church gathered in the garden is, put down your sword. Put it down. That's his last words to us as church. If there was ever a just cause for violence, surely it was that moment when the Roman soldiers are coming to drag away this innocent man. Surely that's the time you can use violence to defend the Son of God. But Jesus says no. That myth of redemptive violence just leads to more violence. We don't just destroy the other, we destroy something sacred in ourselves. And instead, we take that violence upon ourselves, just as Jesus did.
Yes, I find that really very moving, Put down your sword could mean put down your sword, put down a pen that is doing harm in slander, put down a keyboard or a tapping thing, put down a pesticide sprayer, all of those things are and I just love the looking at the dignity of the other, whatever the other is, human or non-human, I suppose. Okay. So non-violence is not picking up the thing that harms. Tell me something more about this thing about taking the violence onto ourselves. You know, what Jesus did in the crucifixion. Tell me more about what's underneath that.
That's another really good question. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think we always have to reflect on context. And Jesus was in a country occupied by empire. That is not our story, sitting in this room today. This may be some people's story from where you originated from or where your family originated from. But this is not our context. We are sitting at the heart of empire. We are sitting in the heart of empire. Now, there's a few bigger empires, because a certain president of a certain country would say they do it bigger and better, but we're pretty close. We're pretty close, and whatever America does, we do next. So I think we have to be very conscious of that, the amount of power and privilege we hold. So I think our challenge as people journeying into a deeper understanding of gospel, peace and justice, because that's where we're trying to get to, isn't it? It isn't peace in some airy-fairy, this'll do sort of way. It's peace based on justice. So my challenge would be, how do we get there? Whether we're trying to bring about justice within mental health services, climate justice, racial justice, ending the arms fair, ending war and militarism. We do that through the lens of non-violence. So as we try to bring about the works of mercy, which is to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick, we have to be conscious that we are swimming in a culture where the works of war are always pushing against us, because we are at the heart of empire. So we can't pretend that we're not tainted by this, and that to some degree, consciously or unconsciously, we collude with this. Whether it's the pesticides because I just can't cope with the weeds in my garden, or whether it's I haven't got time to really think about how I transfer from this bank to that bank, or I can't really be bothered to think about where my pension fund is invested. We are part of a system that depends on our cooperation. And unless we consciously object, now we're at a point in history where we're needing to support conscientious objectors to war, but I would argue we need to consciously object to anything that is propping up those systems.
Yes, and this kind of leads to the next little bit about, what is moral is sometimes not legal, and sometimes what is legal is not moral. And there's a tension there, and there's a need for discernment. So, what are some of the tools that you use to make those decisions, to conscientiously object to some things? Some things, in a sense, is just between me and my choice, but other things put you in confrontation with sometimes the legal system, sometimes other people simply, and their disapproval or discomfort. I
would say two things are really important in this process. we never discern alone, that we live our faith in community. For me, as a religious, obviously my congregation is my first primary community. I'm part of Pax Christi, but I'm also part of other groups, including friendship groups, all sorts of groups. But I think that that's one thing, and I think this event once a year brings together so many great communities, so many great networks. So I think that's important. I think the other element is prayer. I think it was Dorothy Day that said, without prayer, all the rest is useless. So unless we start with prayer, whatever plans and dreams and hopes and visions we have to bring about the kingdom of God are going to be flawed. Now, I'm not saying that, just say a few prayers and it won't be flawed, because, we're being blown this way and that way. But I think that is really important. They'd be the two things I'd certainly start.
Community and prayer. Yeah, and I suppose, does it ever get, I'm sure it does, but how do you deal with it when it does? When it gets exhausting, when there's so much to weigh up and down, where there are so many considerations, so many people involved, and you're exhausted, and how do you react to that also in that non-violent way?
I find it really helpful to remember that it doesn't depend on me. It doesn't just depend on me. That I'm just one piece in this building of the kingdom. And to challenge myself, sometimes I have to ask, am I doing something because of ego or pride, or am I just doing it because everybody else is doing it, or it's expected of me? You're a sister of St. Joseph of Peace, you're chaplain to Pax Christi. Or is it from a deeper place? And I think over the years, I also do spiritual accompaniment, and I think God always sends us people to dialogue with who challenge us and who hold a mirror up sometimes to where God is asking us to do some internal work. So I think one of the things I often say to people, if they're talking about discernment and I want to do X, Y, Z, but I've also got to pay the bills and look after the children and all the things that you all do, we all do. I guess I found myself saying again and again, what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? Is it the waiting lists for mental health and counselling? Is it the situation in Gaza? Is it the climate and ecological crisis? Is it the arms trade? Is it the poverty you're seeing just go through the roof in your parish, in your local community? Whatever breaks your heart, just know it is breaking God's heart too, and lean into that. And find others. We don't do this alone. Connect with others who are on this journey, and ideally others who are bringing the faith dimension to it, but sometimes that isn't possible, so start something, begin something. If there's a gap, have the courage to step into it and bring your skills and bring yourself into that too.
Thank you. We're a little bit beyond half of our time in this conversation. We've heard a lot, and there's been a lot that we've listened to, and I'm sure it's doing stuff in your heart and in your soul. So let's just take a minute of quiet to just see what is bubbling in my heart? What is it that I'm listening to that is provoking a reaction in me? Let's just take a minute. Let's just keep going for a bit longer and keep your questions for the end. So my next little point here, my next little question is, there was a quote from the Right Reverend Bishop Hugh Nelson, who is a Church of England bishop, and he said recently, "Prepare for war and pray for peace." And it strikes me that our society lives like this. This is what we're being told. We've been told that we have to use violence in order to get to a good outcome in the end. Some people might call this the myth of redemptivist violence. I just want to get some of your thoughts about this. How does, what you've explained about gospel nonviolence fit into this? Where is the fallacy in this argument, if that's what there is?
I think we all know the phrase, never again. Yet here we are again and again and again. That particular bishop is bishop to the military, and at the last General Synod, the Church of England spent a whole day talking about this, but refused to find time to talk about Gaza. But let's not, any of us from other denominations, let's not get too pious and excited, because we've all been there. But we had the Strategic Defence Review recently, and Keir Starmer, so we have a Labour government, has cut international aid, which we know is one way to bring true peace and security through education, healthcare, etc., climate justice. So we, as people of Christian nonviolence, are now swimming against the tide. Be aware, we are really now swimming against the tide. We could even be prescribed as terrorists. I say no more. But you know exactly what I'm talking about. You each know what I'm talking about, and two other groups talking about Palestine have had their bank accounts frozen. So we are really swimming against the tide here, just as the early church did. Think of our liturgical calendar. We celebrate the incarnation of God. We have this great big social party for Christmas. The world joins in. What's the feast the next day? Saint Stephen, the first martyr. That's where this road takes us. This is where this road takes us, if we're serious. I'm sitting here very comfortably, but many of my brothers and sisters who have taken non-violent direct action are now in prison, serving the longest sentences people of non-violence have ever served in this country. This is where it takes us. If we are to be conscientious objectors, we need to find ways to be in solidarity with people daring to put their bodies on the line. I've done some small actions and been arrested, and the point isn't being arrested. The point is saying that you are not doing this in my name. It may be legal, but it is not moral.
We're heartened by Pope Leo's conversation about this. Some of his first words as Pope were words of peace. How does this speak in contrast to this other people, including this Church of England bishop?
Yeah, I think we were all certainly within Pax Christi, very relieved that Pope Leo is certainly following on from Pope Francis's clear words on peace and non-violence. And Pope Francis really laid some very strong foundations for us, talking about non-violence as a way of life, a political model that we should all be using, an effective tool for change. And I think that's given some of us within the peace movement the courage to keep on. Pope Francis made an amazing little video a few years ago about the arms trade. And he talked about, why does the arms trade continue? And he said something like, well, we know why it continues, because it makes some people loads of money. And that money is covered in the blood of the innocent. Not my words, the words of our late Pope. He also talked about how the production and the possession of nuclear weapons are immoral, not just using them or threatening to use them, the very production or possession. Yeah, recently a country was bombed because they might have nuclear weapons, but we have them. The hypocrisy of that does not go unnoticed. So I guess my challenge, our challenge is, what can we do to stop this non-violently? I would also recommend, we're not prepared, we're just winging it this evening. We really are winging it. So I don't have a book list I can give you at the end, or a nice PowerPoint we can switch on. But another resource I would really recommend is, and you can just Google it, not now obviously, is Dr. Martin Luther King's 6 Principles of Nonviolence. As a theologian, he really unpacks Jesus' way of nonviolence for those of us living in empire, and how we have to dare to cross a line. So things like the arms trade, we're going to have the big DSCI arms fair coming back to London at the beginning of September. For those of you who don't know, this is one of the biggest international arms fairs in the world. Amnesty International were kicked out of there, I think in 2011, because they were pointing out, oh, look, you're selling things that are used to torture people and abuse people, and oh, there's a person there who doesn't actually have a license to buy things. But how did they get through the door? But we don't talk about that. So some of us try to stop this happening through prayer and action. So Pax Christi, we hold a silent vigil the night before. So the tools of non-violence are varied, and silence is a powerful tool. People don't know what to do with silence. We know what to do with silence. That's the grace of our faith. We lean into it and we allow the Spirit to come and be with us, because we don't do this on our own strength. But we do all sorts of other things. We try and talk to the arms dealers. We have die-ins to block the road. We use humour, drama. There's often a choir. If you can sing, come and join us. If you can't sing, come and join us. There's all sorts of things we can do. And some of us risk arrest because of the immorality of what is going on that does not produce peace and security. We've got caught up in this myth that the nation, the security of a nation is more important than the dignity of each individual and the earth. And I think we have to really rethink that. I'm going to stop. I think I might be waffling a bit.
I think as you speak, it seems very David and Goliath. You've got the big arms trade with money and power, and then you've got a group of people standing in silence or lying on the ground. Is it effective? What does it do? What do those actions do? I know that's a hard question.
If you want to walk this road of gospel nonviolence, you are following a man who, in the eyes of the world, was the biggest failure ever, Jesus. He had this nonviolent ministry, this radical following, and then ends up on the cross, killed by empire. No coincidence that happens as he comes into Jerusalem, goes into the heart of power and throws over the tables. Non-violent, direct action to challenge the whole system, and within a week he's dead. Was that successful? The resurrection is the greatest act of non-violent resistance, because when empire says you're dead, you're supposed to stay dead. And we follow somebody who broke through that by the power of God. We are failures every time. Have we stopped the arms fair? No. Have we stopped the arms trade? No. I'll share a couple of stories though. In 2009, a friend and I went to the first day of the arms fair, and we dressed up because we had to get through security. And I was all smart, well, I thought I was very smartly dressed. And I was living in a house of hospitality for refugees at the time. And I came downstairs all in my smart attire, and one of the guys in the house says, "You look like a nun." I wasn't a nun at the time, but I was like, okay. And we managed to get through the first lot of security, and they bus the arms dealers in. They bring them in on double-decker buses to the Excel Centre in the East End of London. And if you know your history, that's part of London that was bombed more than anywhere. So the irony is just beyond. And you have military, you have politicians, but predominantly arms dealers. And a friend and I went and knelt in front of one of their signs, boasting that this is where you can buy the biggest and best killer weapons in the world. And we threw red paint over their sign to symbolise the blood of the innocent. And we knelt down and we started to pray. And we prayed something called the Litany of Resistance. Now, we expected security to whisk us away before we had said the first prayer. 1 hour later, my knees were numb, and we're like, what is happening? This is bizarre. But only one, no, I tell a lie, so thousands of arms dealers are passing us during this hour, pretending we're not there. Like looking the other way, like, oh, where did you get your coffee from this morning, blah, blah, blah. One came up to me and said, "What do you expect? We're only one step up from monkeys." Implying we're all animals and violence is inevitable, etc., etc. And then another man came up to me, and I pray for this man every day. He leant over my shoulder, I was kneeling, and he whispered, "I fear you are right." And I often wonder, is he still an arms dealer? did something change in that moment for him? Because something changed for me. Something really changed for me. The police did come and we were put in a van, and then security took the notice board. It was one of those big A boards, you know, that's now covered in red paint. They took the A board away and brought a new one. And I kid you not, the Holy Spirit then blew it over into the red paint that was on the floor. Do we have success? I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure the early Christians wondered, what are we doing? You know, he's sending us out into the whole world, 2 by 2. And there we were, 2 of us in front of the artists. I don't know. I just trust that the God of love and non-violence will do what needs to be done through the little actions that each of us try to do in our own small way.
I think that's probably a good place to pause and just sit for a few moments of silence again. You might want to think, you know, is there a question that you'd like to ask Sister Katrina? But more importantly, just notice for yourself what is bubbling up within you. Is there a call there for you? Is there a question? Is there a challenge? So there's going to be a roving mic. So if somebody has a question, maybe we'll take 1 or 2 or 3 at a time, and we'll listen to your questions, and then we will see what we can answer. So if you have a question, if you can just indicate with your hand, and the mic will come to you. And there's Andrea at the back after.
Could you define what you mean by prayer?
Thank you. Excellent question. Can we have Andrea's question as well? Andrea?
Thank you. Incredibly inspiring. I don't know if it's a question or reflection. In the exercise that we did, I hope, Father, you don't mind sharing. Father Kevin mentioned, or make me reflect about the link between peace and forgiveness, the intrinsically link between peace and forgiveness. And it seems that when we talk about peace or bring peace, obviously we want to do things, and you give this great example of direct actions that probably most of us in this room agree with. But at the same time, this element of forgiveness, it's, I imagine, like a very profound spiritual practice, which is the opposite of action. So how we can exercise or work on this forgiveness, which is almost as difficult to stop our arm trades, I guess, because it's internally and collectively and communal. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you're not expecting to get to your fair trade wine anytime soon if you're going to pose questions like those. Prayer. Okay, I will quote Henry Nouwen. Prayer is resistance, and resistance is prayer. Prayer is resistance. When we say the Our Father, we're resisting the world as it is and praying for God's kingdom to come. The challenge is, how do we allow prayer to give us the courage and the wisdom to go out there and put it into practice? That's the challenge. Forgiveness. Oh. You know, I can remember going on events as a teenager during the miners' strike, and I can remember some of the miners saying to me, "We will never forgive. We will never forget, and we will never forgive." And I'm seeing those words again and again today about certain situations. You can't force anyone to forgive. I think I have a very relatively unique experience of forgiveness, having grown up in the Protestant community in Northern Ireland and now being a Catholic. I think it's made me realise that forgiveness is grace, and it's a lifelong process. It's a lifelong process. But forgiveness isn't something that just happens. It's a grace. You know, our God of nonviolence reigns on the just and the unjust. Whether we like it or not, that's the truth. That's the truth. But peacemaking is a whole process of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of spiritual practice that, again, I come back to community. We do this in community. And in community, we affirm one another, but we also challenge one another in this.
Thank you. Any other questions? Great. And maybe if you could just tell us who you are before you tell us the question.
My name is Anthony Itiet. I live in Newcastle. I'm Irish by naturalization. My question is, when we talk about peace, then we cannot forget the process of harmonized citation. So how can we implement that in a society where there is no peace?
How can you just repeat?
I'm talking about harmony. How can you,
harmony?
Yeah. How can you implement that in a society where there is no
peace?
There
is no peace. Yeah. Okay.
There should be a process for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. Another question? I know there's Bakani over there, and there's another lady over there.
Thank you. I really love Ron Williams, and I wish him a speedy and full recovery, but I'm really glad that we got to hear the two of you today, so thank you so much. I've been reading a lot about how war begins in policy. It begins in creating more and more extreme separations between the wealthiest and the poorest. And when I look at what's happening in this country and where I'm from, in Zimbabwe, that difference between the rich and poor, that separation of people from each other seems to be a preamble for war. So in thinking about war as policy, what guidance, it's less visible perhaps than bombs, but I think as profound.
Could you just tell us who you are?
Oh, you already did it. I'm Wakani, and my question was sort of not in my work capacity. I work for Operation Nana, so please come say hi.
Thank you. And there was one lady over here as well. Maybe we'll take that and then we'll sorry, I can see you. Next one.
So, my name is Yolanda Eldringham, and it's not so much a question as I'd like to share with you some words that have come through a group trying to help the Palestinian people. And what the words I'd like to help come from some of the cry for help. It says, first off, can we move away from the weak, meaningless words, peace? Who was it who said, when an oppressor has his legs on your throat, you have every right to resist with force? The word peace, and this is in quotes, is an imperialist word to silence those crying out for justice. So no, we don't talk about peace until we have accountability, justice, and resistance. And finally, peace only comes after justice, liberation, and reparation. And for myself, I am fed up of prayers for peace. Let's pray for justice, liberation, reparation. Peace will follow.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, in stark contrast to our government telling us to be war ready and battle ready, and the Church of England spending days saying, you know, prepare for war and pray for peace, as if that will bring harmony. Pope Leo said we need institutions for peace. And to that I too would add the word justice. So that means, in terms of policy, a complete rethinking of what we mean by creating a secure, safe, just world. Because we need to think beyond borders. So imagine if in our schools we were taught the tools of non-violence. Imagine if in our schools we're taught history that reveals the truth of who we are and where we're from and our history of empire. There's some good workshops that might touch on this. But we have to really have a total mind shift. It's about changing language, it's a change in theology. And I'm as guilty as the next person of saying, oh, let's have a peace prayer. And I hear the anger and I hear the frustration. But I will stand by my commitment that unless we approach this through the lens of non-violence, unless our hearts change, unless my heart changes, whatever policy we have will be short-lived. It will be really short-lived. We might get a slightly better government who restores international aid, who stops the arms sales to Israel, blah, blah, blah. Until the next crisis, until the next war, until the next genocide. And that change has to start with me, it has to start with us, and we have the tools. We have the tools with a Bible in one hand and Catholic social teaching in the other, and the wisdom of our Quaker friends and other denominations. We have the tools to do this.
Thank you. I think, we're about there. But the lady over there had a question, so maybe if we can hear your question, and if there's one other absolutely desperate one, put your hand right up. That man over there, and that's the end. Thank you.
Hi, Sister Katrina, Sister MaryAnne. Lovely to be here. It's my first time here. My name is Ruth. My question is, I was very touched by your personal story of how you entered the store and you immediately took a stance as you were about to be frisked. And my question is, do you think much has changed, especially with the advent of social media and the desensitization around violence and the images and the videos that we see on social media? Thank you.
The gentleman over there.
I'm a charitable refugee lawyer and partly a Quaker and partly an Anglican. I'm a great admirer of Pope Francis and Pope Leo. Yes, this isn't just a question for this session. Maybe it's for the whole movement or the whole weekend or whatever. Very simple question. Is it wrong to arm Ukraine?
Even the best for last there.
Shall I start with social media? Just that little much. Yeah, I think desensitization is a really powerful word. When my grandparents used to come from Derbyshire to visit us in Belfast, my granny used to cry because she said we'd be running around the streets and there was soldiers with guns and we wouldn't bat an eyelid, not an eyelid. And she would be quaking and crying and fearful for the life of her grandchildren. And I think it's the same with social media. I was on a bus recently and this child behind me was kicking the back of my seat. And as I turned round, he had his mum's phone in his hand. He was obviously playing some sort of game on the phone. And every time he shouted, "Kill!" he kicked. So it was like, "Kill! Kill!" He was preschool. So yeah, I think that's a huge thing to reflect on. And I think we're a bit slow within the church to think about that. I know Pope Leo is very conscious of this. So hopefully that will prompt us. But excellent question. Should we arm Ukraine? I think you know what I am going to say. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. We told the world never again. We said never again. If I sit here and say stop harming Israel, I'm not saying arm Palestine. Now, many of you may disagree with me, some of you may disagree with me. I don't believe that a mother who holds the corpse of her child in her hand cares whether that bomb was fired by Ukraine, Russia. I don't think a mother in Gaza cares if the bullet came from a weapon made in the UK or the US or a rogue Hamas bullet. She weeps for her child. We have to break the cycle. And I choose to follow this crazy guy called Jesus, who I truly believe was a pacifist, impractical, dreamer, maybe, but I don't see So you might say, well, non-violence doesn't work, but I would argue neither does war. So we have to find a way to honour the image of God in every single brother and sister, every single one. That is the only way we are going to break this cycle that is causing so much misery and suffering and goes on to create trauma and intergenerational trauma in a way that never ever ends.
I think that's a great way to finish our session this evening, with this challenge ringing in our ears, whatever it makes us feel inside. And luckily we've got another day and a half to convert